The air was cold, the moon was gone, and I was staring at something that wasn't supposed to be able to move. I think we've all got that one Halloween memory, right? That one time you thought you saw a shadow or heard a noise and you laughed it off the next day. This story, this isn't that. This is the one that still makes my skin crawl 2 years later. It's the reason I don't go out on October 31st anymore. I'm telling you this because no matter how much you think you love a good scare, you don't want to find out the difference between a costume and the real thing. This happened in a little town in upstate New York, a place called Black Creek. Every year, Black Creek has this huge corn maze. It's not one of those fancy professional mazes with little flags and safety staff. It's just this old farmer, a guy named Hank, who carves a few miles of winding path through his massive field and charges $10 a head. It's dark, muddy, and honestly, kind of poorly run. That's why we loved it. It was Halloween night. My friends and I, there were 4 of us, had done the same thing since high school. We'd get into some cheap, silly costumes and hit Hank's corn maze just before closing. This year, my phone was almost dead, which is a small, stupid detail, but it ends up mattering a whole lot. We were messing around, trying to scare each other, the usual dumb stuff. We were deep inside, maybe an hour in, and that's when it all went sideways. I remember turning a corner and they were gone. Not like, oh, they're a few steps ahead gone, but completely silent. I stopped dead in my tracks. My breath was the only thing I could hear, fogging up in the cold, still air. The corn stalks were maybe 10 feet high, dry, yellow, and packed so tight that the path was like a dark, suffocating tunnel. I called out, "Hey guys, seriously, come on, that's not funny." Nothing. Just the wind. A long, sighing sound, high above the stalks. This is the point where I started to feel that first little sting of panic. It's a feeling that starts small, right in the center of your chest, and then it spreads. You tell yourself it's just a joke. They're hiding, they're waiting to jump out and scream, but a minute went by, then 2, and the silence was just too thick. It wasn't a playful silence, it was empty. I checked my phone. 2% battery. Perfect. I started to walk back the way I thought we came. I was moving slow, trying to listen for a laugh, a whisper, anything. My boots crunched on the dry earth and the occasional fallen piece of cornstalk, and every single crunch sounded like a gunshot in the dead quiet. I kept telling myself, the exit is right over here, just keep going. Then I noticed the candy. It was a small, bright red wrapper for a cheap caramel chew, just lying in the dirt path. Now, this maze was usually pretty clean because Hank would send his grandkids out the next day to pick up the trash. But here was this wrapper. I kicked it a little, not thinking much of it. A few steps later, another one. A tiny little chocolate bar wrapper. And then another. And another. It was a trail. A breadcrumb trail, but with cheap Halloween candy. My first thought was that my friend Mike, who has a terrible habit of dropping things, was leaving a path for me because he knew I'd get lost. That thought actually made me feel a little better, a small knot of relief loosening in my gut. So I followed it. I decided this must be the path to the exit, or at least the path to my friends. This is where the story gets its teeth. The trail of candy didn't lead toward the exit. It led deeper into a part of the maze that was narrower, darker, and felt abandoned. The corn seemed thicker here. The air felt colder, and the moonlight, which had been occasionally poking through, was completely gone. I was walking purely by the feel of the path under my feet. I must have followed this trail for a good 5 minutes, and the little pieces of candy were getting smaller and smaller, like someone was rationing them out. I was getting frustrated, and the initial relief was fading back into that low-level fear. Where were my friends? Why were they doing this? I rounded a sharp corner, a T-junction, and stopped so suddenly I almost tripped. And that's when I saw the figure. It was standing about 20 feet down the opposite path, completely still. It looked like a scarecrow, but not a normal one. It was tall, maybe 7 feet easily, and rail thin. It was dressed in this weird, old-fashioned costume. A black suit, maybe, but too baggy and hanging off the shoulders. On its head was a pale, expressionless mask. Not a classic ghost or monster mask, but something featureless, almost like a blank porcelain plate. It was just white. I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs, a loud, frantic beat that I was sure the figure could hear. Now, remember, this is a corn maze on Halloween. Props are everywhere. This had to be a prop, a really good, creepy prop. But something felt wrong. It wasn't tied to a post, it was just standing there freely, leaning slightly forward, as if it had just taken a step and stopped mid-motion. I swallowed hard and whispered, "Mike, is that you? It's not funny, man." No response. The figure didn't move an inch. It didn't even seem to be breathing, but in the faint, diffused light, I could see something glinting near its feet. Another candy wrapper. I stood there for what felt like 5 hours, arguing with myself. It's a mannequin. It's a statue. Hank put it here. The fear was battling the logic, and for a minute, logic won. I figured if it was a prop, I'd just walk past it and find the way out. It was creepy, but it wasn't alive. So I took a step, a loud, clumsy step, and then another. I was trying to act casual, like this didn't bother me at all. As I got closer, I started to notice the details that made the logic crumble. The mask wasn't porcelain, it was fabric, stretched tight, and the white color was too white, almost glowing. And the hands, they were long, unnatural, dangling out of the too long sleeves. They weren't fake hands. They looked thin and pale like real human hands that had been kept in water for a long time. I was maybe 10 feet away when I stopped again. I couldn't do it. My body wouldn't let me get any closer. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing straight up. I turned around, deciding to take a different path. Screw Mike's little candy trail. I'm finding the exit. I speed-walked back toward the T-junction, my eyes darting nervously over my shoulder. I got back to the junction, turned right, and started heading down a path that I thought was the way out. I was moving fast now, not caring about the noise, just wanting to be done with the corn and the shadows and the figure. I power-walked for what had to be another 10 minutes, the stalks blurring past me. The thought of that still, silent thing driving me forward. And then I saw the corner, a distinctive kink in the path where the corn stalks bent over at a weird angle. I remembered that corner. I had passed it about 3 minutes ago. I was going in circles. A cold wave of despair washed over me. I stopped, hands on my knees, trying to catch my breath and calm the frantic panic. This maze was huge, and I was completely lost. I looked up, and right there, in the middle of the path, perfectly centered, was the figure again. But this time it was different. It was closer than it should have been. It was standing maybe 30 feet away at the end of the long, straight path I was on. But it hadn't been there when I started down this path. I would have seen it. I know I would have seen it. This is where the fear got real. This wasn't a prank anymore. This wasn't a statue. This thing was moving. I stumbled back a few steps, my mind racing. Run! Turn around and run! But I couldn't move. My feet felt glued to the earth. I was locked in a staring contest with a featureless white mask in the middle of a dark cornfield. The figure was completely motionless, but its silence was a scream. It was the silence of something that doesn't need to breathe, doesn't need to fidget, doesn't need to blink. It was utterly, terrifyingly still. Then, Very slowly, unbelievably slowly, the head started to tilt. Not a smooth human tilt. It was like a rusty gear grinding into place. A tiny, almost imperceptible creak seemed to cut through the silence, and the head moved maybe 10 degrees and stopped. Now it was looking right at me, or at least the white mask was. That was the line. That tiny, impossible movement. I didn't stick around for the next one. I turned and ran. I ran like my life depended on it, because in that moment, I knew it did. I slammed into the cornstalks, didn't bother following the path, and just burst straight through the thin walls of dry corn. The noise was deafening, a loud, ripping, tearing sound, like 1,000 pieces of paper being shredded at once. I didn't care about the scratches on my face or the sting in my eyes. I ran and ran, not toward the exit, just away from the figure. I felt like I was running on a treadmill. The corn never ended. The claustrophobia was crushing. The stalks kept grabbing at my clothes, pulling me back, trying to trap me. My lungs were burning, screaming for air, and all I could hear was the frantic thump, thump, thump of my own blood rushing in my ears. I finally reached a section that was slightly more open, where I could actually make a turn without having to crash through a wall of dry corn. I paused, bent over, trying to suck in huge, ragged breaths. I listened. Over the sound of my own panic, I was listening for that telltale ripping sound, the sound of the figure following me. Nothing, just the wind and the silence. I stayed there for maybe a full minute, frozen in the dark, trying to decide my next move. Should I call the police? What would I even say? There's a really tall mannequin moving around in a corn maze? They'd laugh and hang up. I started to move again, quieter this time, following a clear path, hoping it was the final stretch. And then I heard it. Not a sound from the corn, but a sound from the path behind me. Crunch. It was a slow, deliberate sound, the sound of a foot stepping heavily onto a dried corn husk. It wasn't the clumsy, hurried crunch of a running person. It was a measured, cold marching sound. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I broke into a sprint again, faster than before. I was dodging corners now, taking wild guesses. The crunching sound started to pick up pace, and now there were two sounds, the crunching footsteps and a low, dry rustling. The sound of that baggy old suit dragging against the stalks as the figure moved. It was gaining on me. I could feel the cold emptiness of that white mask closing in. I was pushing my body past its absolute limit. My legs were heavy and aching. My chest felt tight and my throat was raw. I screamed, a useless, raw sound that just disappeared into the endless sky above the corn. Then, miraculously, I saw it. A faint, distant light. It wasn't a flashlight. It was a brighter, warmer light. The light from the ticket booth and the parking lot. I ran towards it with a desperate animal energy. The path opened up slightly, leading to what I thought was the final wall. I crashed through it, not caring about the splinters of the pain. I burst out of the maze and stumbled onto the muddy open field near the parking lot. I didn't stop running until I reached the small, flickering yellow light of the ticket booth. It was deserted. Hank had already packed up and gone home. My friend's car was gone too. They must have thought I'd left without them. Or maybe they just panicked and took off when they realized I was gone. I stood there, gasping, shaking uncontrollably, leaning against the wooden wall of the booth. I was safe. I was out. I slowly turned around, looking back at the massive black wall of the corn maze. The field was dark and silent. It looked normal, like a field of corn, like nothing had happened. But then my eyes caught something. Right at the edge of the corn, maybe 50 yards from where I stood, where the last row of stalks met the open field, there it was. The figure. It wasn't moving. It was just standing there, perfectly framed by the entrance to the maze. The tall, thin, dark shape against the black night. The white mask was facing directly toward me. It was too far away to see details, but I didn't need to. I knew what it was. It wasn't rushing toward me. It wasn't trying to scare me. It was just watching. It stood there, motionless, as I fumbled with my dying phone. I turned it on, the screen lighting up my face with a faint blue glow. 1% battery. I barely had time to call a cab and explain where I was before the screen went black. I never took my eyes off the figure. I stood there, shivering, waiting for the cab to arrive, and for the entire 15 minutes that I waited, it didn't move. It was the most disturbing stillness I have ever experienced. It wasn't the stillness of a statue. It was the stillness of a predator that knows the game is over, but is waiting to see what you do next. It had caught me, toyed with me, and now it was letting me go. But it wanted me to know that it could have taken me. When the cab finally pulled up, I didn't say a word to the driver. I just got in the back, locked the door, and stared out the rear window until the towering wall of corn disappeared completely. The next day I called my friends. They said they got bored and thought I ditched them when they couldn't find me. They were clueless. They thought it was hilarious. I never told them what happened. They wouldn't have believed me anyway. They would have just thought I was trying to get back at them for leaving. I did some digging later on. Nothing about a moving mannequin, obviously. But I did find an old, forgotten news story from that area dating back almost 20 years. It was about a series of disappearances near Black Creek. Young people, always near the end of October. They never found the people, but they did find one thing. Small, brightly colored wrappers from cheap, generic Halloween candy scattered in the fields near where they vanished. The trail just stopped. It makes you think about that trail I followed. It makes you wonder why the figure was leading me deeper and deeper into the maze. Was it a game? Was it a guide? Was it just a piece of bait? The part that sticks with me, the part that keeps me up at night, is that final moment. The figure, standing at the edge of the corn. It had all the time in the world to chase me, to catch me, to do whatever it was going to do, but it didn't. It just watched me leave. It wasn't a prank. It wasn't a prop. It was something that understood how fear works. It let me go, not because it was done with me, but because it wanted to make sure that I'd be the one to tell the story. It gave me a scare that I can never forget, and it left me with the knowledge that it is still out there, waiting for the corn to grow high again. And that's the real horror of it. Because when you're standing in the dark and a prop moves when it shouldn't, you realize that some scares aren't just for fun. Some things are real, and they are waiting for you to get lost. So the next time you're out late on Halloween, and you think you see something that's too tall, too pale, and too perfectly still, do yourself a favor. Don't call out its name. Just run. And don't look back.